You know what's crazy? We see them on red carpets, magazine covers, living these seemingly perfect lives worth millions. But what happens when the spotlight fades? When the phone stops ringing? When the scripts stop coming? Today, I'm going to tell you something that'll blow your mind. Some of the biggest names in Hollywood, the ones you grew up watching, the ones you idolized, had to do something that most of us do every single day. They had to get real jobs. And I'm not talking about passion projects or starting production companies. I'm talking about working at grocery stores, driving Ubers, and yes, even cleaning toilets. The truth is darker and more inspiring than you could ever imagine. So buckle up, because what you're about to discover will change how you see fame forever. Let's start with someone you definitely know. Remember the charming, quirky girl from a massive hit franchise that defined a generation? The one who played the best friend we all wanted. Yeah, that one. After the franchise ended, the calls stopped. Hollywood has this brutal habit of typecasting, and she found herself in that exact trap. Nobody wanted to see her as anything else. The auditions became fewer. The rejections piled up. And bills. They don't care about your IMDb page. So what did she do? She went back to basics. She started working at a boutique clothing store in Los Angeles. Not as a brand ambassador, not for some influencer deal. She was folding clothes, working the register, helping customers find their size. Can you imagine recognizing her while she's asking if you need help finding something in a different color? But here's what's beautiful about this story. She didn't hide. She didn't feel ashamed. She kept auditioning, kept pushing, and eventually, her persistence paid off. She's back on screen now, doing independent films that actually showcase her range. The lesson: your worth isn't defined by your current circumstance. Now let's talk about a guy who was literally everywhere in the 90s. This dude was in action movies, comedies, dramas, you name it. He had that recognizable face that made every movie better just by being in it. But Hollywood is fickle, and by the mid-2000s, his phone stopped ringing. The roles dried up. The savings dwindled. And he found himself facing a choice that nobody prepares you for. He could wallow in bitterness, or he could adapt. He chose to adapt. He became a rideshare driver. Yep, you could have gotten picked up by a bona fide movie star and not even known it. Well, until you looked at his face and thought, wait a minute. According to interviews, most passengers didn't recognize him at first. And when they did, the reactions ranged from disbelief to genuine curiosity. He said those rides taught him more about real people than any acting class ever did. He heard stories, struggles, dreams. It humbled him. And you know what? That authenticity he gained, it came through in his later work. He's doing character roles now, small but impactful parts that critics love. Sometimes you need to go back to ground level to remember what it's all about. Here's a story that'll really get you. There was this actress, stunning, talented, had a few major roles in big-budget films. She was being groomed to be the next big thing. Then, life happened. A combination of bad career advice, a couple of box office bombs that weren't her fault, and suddenly she was yesterday's news. But she had a daughter to raise, a mortgage to pay, and pride doesn't feed your family. So she did something extraordinary. She became a real estate agent. Not in some glamorous way, but genuinely learning the business from scratch, getting her license, showing houses, negotiating deals. She said the rejection in real estate was actually harder than Hollywood rejection because it was personal. People would recognize her and some would even mock her for having fallen so far. Can you imagine? Having strangers make fun of your life choices because you're trying to provide for your family? But she persisted. She became genuinely good at it. Built a client base. And here's the twist. Through one of her real estate clients, she met a director who was looking for someone with real-world experience for a role. She's back in the game now, more grounded, more real, and doing some of her best work ever. Let me tell you about a child star situation that's both heartbreaking and uplifting. You know those kids who were absolutely everywhere? Disney Channel, Nickelodeon, the works. This particular guy was a household name before he hit puberty. He had everything, money, fame, recognition everywhere he went. Then puberty hit, and in Hollywood, that's basically a career death sentence for child actors. He aged out of the cute kid roles but wasn't old enough for adult roles. The transition period that should have been normal teenage years became a nightmare of irrelevance. By 18, he was broke. His parents had mismanaged his earnings, a story way too common in this industry. So what does a former child star with no college degree and no real work experience do? He worked at an electronics store. He was the guy asking if you needed help finding a laptop or explaining the difference between HDMI cables. Imagine being recognized by someone while wearing a company polo shirt and name tag. The humiliation could have destroyed him. But instead, he used it as fuel. He saved every penny, took acting classes at night, and slowly rebuilt his career. Now he's doing voice acting work and smaller streaming projects. He's not a household name anymore, but he's working, he's happy, and he's in control of his own narrative. There's this absolutely wild story about an actress who was in one of the biggest superhero-adjacent movies of the early 2000s. Not the main hero, but a significant supporting character that fans loved. After that franchise ended, she expected offers to flood in. They didn't. In fact, the opposite happened. She was too associated with that one character. Casting directors couldn't see her as anyone else. Years went by. Savings depleted. And she found herself needing to make money fast. She became a bartender. Not at some trendy Hollywood spot where celebrities hang out. A regular neighborhood bar in the valley. She made drinks, listened to regulars complain about their lives, broke up the occasional argument, and cleaned up at closing time. She said the most surreal moment was when a drunk customer kept insisting she looked exactly like the actress from that superhero movie. She just smiled and said she got that a lot. The anonymity in plain sight was almost liberating. No expectations, no judgment from people who knew who she used to be. Just honest work. She eventually transitioned into behind-the-scenes work, producing and writing. Sometimes the path forward isn't a straight line back to where you were. Sometimes it's a completely new direction. Now this next one is going to shock you because this person was an Oscar nominee. Let me repeat that. Oscar-nominated actor. Had that prestigious nomination, did the red carpet, the whole thing. But one nomination doesn't guarantee a career. The follow-up roles were disappointing. Some bad movies that tanked. A reputation for being difficult to work with, whether deserved or not. And suddenly, this Oscar-nominated actor was unemployable in Hollywood. The industry had moved on. So what do you do with an Oscar nomination on your resume and bills to pay? He became a substitute teacher. Yes, teaching high school drama and English classes. Can you imagine being a teenager and your substitute teacher is someone who was nominated for an Academy Award? The kids didn't believe him at first. They thought he was making it up. Until one student Googled him and found his IMDb page. The classroom went absolutely silent. But here's what's incredible. He said teaching gave him more satisfaction than most of his acting roles ever did. Influencing young minds, encouraging kids who felt like outsiders, helping them find confidence through drama class. He still acts occasionally, mostly in theater now, but teaching became his primary passion. Sometimes what you think is a failure is actually a redirection to your true purpose. Let's talk about the harsh reality of the modeling to acting pipeline. There was this model who transitioned to acting, landed a few decent roles, became a recognizable face. But the thing about being hired primarily for your looks, there's always someone younger, fresher coming up behind you. By her mid-30s, the roles became less frequent. The casting calls dried up, and the savings from her modeling days were long gone. She needed work. She became a fitness instructor, teaching spin classes, yoga, personal training sessions. She said the first few weeks were brutal. People would recognize her and she could see the pity in their eyes. Or worse, the smugness. Like they were happy to see someone knocked down from their pedestal. But slowly, something shifted. Her clients started seeing her as a real person, not just a former celebrity. They shared their lives with her, their struggles with weight, self-esteem, relationships. She became part of their support system. And through that community, she found healing for her own identity crisis. She's still in fitness now, runs her own studio, and occasionally does small acting roles. But she's not chasing fame anymore. She's found something more valuable. Peace. Here's a story about a guy who had a very specific type of fame. He was a wrestler turned actor, but not one of the ones who made it mega big. He had a solid run, did a few action movies, had a fan base. But the stunts took a toll on his body. Injuries piled up. Insurance became a nightmare. And the roles that required intense physicality were no longer possible. He needed work that wouldn't destroy what was left of his body. He became a truck driver. Long-haul trucking across the country, delivering goods, spending weeks on the road. He said the solitude was exactly what he needed after years of constantly being on. No cameras, no fans, no expectations. Just him, the road, and the radio. Other truckers he met had no idea who he was. To them, he was just another guy trying to make a living. That anonymity healed something in him. He started a YouTube channel about trucking, eventually merged it with his wrestling past, and found a niche audience. Now he does convention appearances, and his YouTube channel makes him enough to live comfortably. He found his people, just not in the way he expected. There's this particularly touching story about an actress who was absolutely beloved in a cult classic TV show from the late 90s. The show had a dedicated fanbase, but it wasn't a mainstream mega hit. When the show ended, she expected her fanbase would translate to new opportunities. It didn't. Cult status doesn't always pay the bills. She struggled for years, doing tiny guest spots here and there, barely scraping by. Eventually, she had to face reality. She became a dog groomer. She'd always loved animals, so it wasn't completely random. But going from playing a character that people quoted and cosplayed to washing and trimming dogs, the emotional adjustment was brutal. She dealt with depression, anxiety, questioned every choice she'd ever made. But the dogs didn't care about her credits. They just cared that she was gentle and patient. And the pet owners who recognized her were almost universally kind. They'd tell her how much the show meant to them, how it got them through hard times. Those conversations reminded her that her work had mattered. It had value beyond box office numbers or ratings. She still grooms dogs, but she also does fan conventions now and has embraced her cult status. She learned that sometimes the biggest impact isn't the widest reach. Now let me tell you about a supporting actor who was in literally everything for about a 5-year span. Every major comedy, every ensemble cast, you saw his face. He was working constantly, making good money, living the dream. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The trend of his type of comedy changed. His style was out of favor. And Hollywood has no loyalty to anyone. He went from booking multiple projects a year to nothing. The financial fall was catastrophic. He'd been living the lifestyle, not saving properly, assuming the work would always be there. Classic mistake. He lost his house, his car, everything. And he ended up working at a car wash. Actually washing cars, drying them, cleaning the interiors. The physical labor was humbling. The minimum wage was shocking. He said he'd been so disconnected from how most people lived that it was almost like being in a foreign country. But the guys he worked with, they didn't care about Hollywood. They cared about whether you showed up on time and pulled your weight. He learned what real work ethic looked like. Eventually, he started doing stand-up comedy at night, developed a whole new act about his experience, and that led to a comeback. He's doing character work now, smaller roles but steady. And he says he'll never take it for granted again. Let's talk about a woman who was a genuine movie star in the 80s. She was in blockbusters, worked with legendary directors, had magazine covers, the whole package. Then the 90s happened and the roles became less glamorous. By the 2000s, she was essentially retired, not by choice but by necessity. Nobody was calling. The savings were depleting faster than expected. And she needed income. She became a life coach and motivational speaker. Now, you might think that's still adjacent to fame, but it wasn't glamorous. She was doing small local seminars, workshops at community centers, charging modest fees. Some people came specifically because they recognized her. Others had no idea about her past and were just looking for guidance. She said the ones who didn't know her past were actually more receptive. They weren't distracted by the novelty. They just listened to her message. And through helping others rebuild their lives, she rebuilt her own sense of purpose. She wrote a book about resilience that did modestly well. She's carved out a new career entirely, one built on authenticity rather than image. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. Here's a story about a guy who was known for playing bad guys. He had that look, that voice, perfect villain material. He worked steadily for years in that lane. But eventually, even villains age out if they're not top tier. The calls became less frequent. The roles became smaller. And then they stopped altogether. He had a family to support, couldn't afford to wait around hoping for a comeback. He became a security guard. Night shifts at office buildings, occasionally at events. The irony of playing dangerous characters on screen while literally being the person who keeps people safe wasn't lost on him. He said the night shift isolation gave him a lot of time to think. About his choices, His career, his ego. He started writing during those quiet night hours. Scripts, short stories, anything creative. One of his scripts got noticed, not for him to act in, but for someone else to produce. That script sale gave him enough money to take a breath. He's working in writing now, occasionally acts in projects he writes himself. The security job taught him patience and observation skills that made his writing better. Sometimes the detour is where you learn the skills you actually needed. There was this actress who did a lot of romantic comedies in the late 90s and early 2000s. She had that girl next door vibe that audiences loved. But romantic comedies fell out of fashion, and suddenly her brand wasn't marketable anymore. She tried to pivot to drama, but casting directors couldn't see past her rom-com past. Years of auditions and rejections took their toll. She needed money and needed a break from the constant rejection. She became a wedding planner. It made sense in a way. She understood romance, aesthetics, coordination. But the job was grueling. Demanding brides, stressful timelines, things going wrong at the last minute. She said after a year of wedding planning, she had so much more respect for anyone in the service industry. The entitlement and rudeness she dealt with was eye-opening. But she also witnessed genuine love, real moments of joy, family bonds. It reminded her why she loved romantic stories in the first place. She started writing a screenplay based on her wedding planning experiences, sold it, and it got made into a streaming movie. She didn't star in it, but she produced it. Sometimes the next chapter of your career comes from the unexpected place you land. Let me tell you about a child actress situation that went very differently. This girl was in a massive franchise, played a beloved character, seemed set for life. But when the franchise ended, she was in her late teens, and Hollywood had no idea what to do with her. Too old for kid roles, too young for adult roles, too associated with one character. The typical child star trap. But unlike many others, she made a decision early on. She got a regular job at a coffee shop and enrolled in community college. She didn't try to cling to fame. She let it go willingly. Customers would recognize her sometimes, ask for photos, and she'd politely oblige. But she was genuinely more interested in her psychology classes than in chasing auditions. She eventually got her degree, became a licensed therapist, and now works specifically with former child actors dealing with trauma and identity issues. She occasionally does podcast interviews about her experience, and she's become an advocate for better protections for child actors. Her story is proof that success doesn't have to mean staying famous. Sometimes success is choosing your own definition of a meaningful life. Now this next story is particularly painful. There was an actor who had a breakout role in a critically acclaimed indie film. Everyone said he was the next big thing. He got an agent at a major agency, started going on auditions for huge projects. But he didn't book them. Close calls, chemistry reads, final considerations, but always the bridesmaid, never the bride. The pressure mounted. The expectations were crushing. And the indie film that launched him became an albatross around his neck. Everything else was compared to it. Years passed without another role of that caliber. His agent dropped him. The money ran out. He ended up working at a call center doing customer service for an internet company. Sitting in a cubicle, dealing with angry customers about their Wi-Fi, while his breakout film was being studied in film schools. The psychological toll was immense. He struggled with depression and substance issues. But the structure of that regular job, as soul-crushing as it felt, gave him stability. The co-workers who had no connection to Hollywood treated him like a normal person. That normalcy was grounding. He eventually got sober, started doing community theater, and found joy in acting again without the pressure of fame. He does small roles now occasionally, but his main gig is still customer service, and he's okay with that. He learned that your career doesn't define your worth. There's this story about a stunt performer who transitioned to acting and actually got some decent roles. Action movies mostly, which made sense given his background. But action stars have a shelf life, especially if you're not a household name. The injuries accumulated. The insurance premiums skyrocketed. And the roles disappeared. He needed work that utilized his skills but didn't risk his already damaged body. He became a warehouse worker and then a supervisor at a logistics company. Physical work but manageable. He said the hardest part was explaining his resume. How do you tell an HR person you went from being in movies to applying for warehouse work? But he got the job based on his work ethic and reliability. His co-workers eventually found out about his past, and reactions varied. Some thought it was cool, others thought it was sad, most just didn't care. They had their own struggles. He learned that the world doesn't revolve around Hollywood. Most people are just trying to get through their day, pay their bills, take care of their families. He's still at that company, moved up to management, and he says is happier now than he ever was chasing fame. Sometimes the story ends not with a comeback but with contentment in a completely different life. Let me tell you about an actress who was part of an ensemble cast in a beloved TV show that ran for several seasons. She wasn't the lead, but she was a fan favorite. When the show ended, she expected opportunities. But ensemble cast members often struggle post-show unless they were the breakout star. She wasn't. She auditioned relentlessly for years, booked a few minor things, but nothing substantial. The rejections were constant and brutal. She needed income and needed out of the audition grind for her mental health. She became a nanny for a wealthy family in Los Angeles. The irony of taking care of someone else's children while her own career dreams died wasn't lost on her. But the kids didn't care about her credits. They just wanted someone who would play with them, read them stories, make them feel safe. She said those kids saved her life. They reminded her what actually mattered. Their innocence and joy were infectious. Eventually, one of the parents worked in animation and asked if she'd be interested in voice work. That connection led to a voice acting career that's been steady for years now. She's not on camera anymore, but she's working consistently and making good money. The path wasn't what she expected, but it brought her to a place of stability and satisfaction. Here's a particularly interesting story about an actor who was in a massive sci-fi franchise. Not a main character, but a recurring role that had a dedicated fan base. After the franchise ended, he tried to leverage that fan base into other opportunities. But typecasting is real, and nobody wanted him for anything but similar sci-fi roles, which weren't being offered. He decided to embrace his niche differently. He started working at a comic book store. It made sense to him. The people there were his fans, they understood the genre, and he genuinely loved comics. But working retail is humbling no matter who you are. Dealing with difficult customers, long hours on your feet, minimum wage. Some customers recognized him and were thrilled. Others recognized him and seemed to take pleasure in seeing him reduced to this. But the owner of the store was a good person and the community that formed around the store was supportive. He started doing signings there, which brought in business. He began hosting trivia nights. Eventually, he bought into the business as a partner. Now he co-owns several comic book stores and does convention appearances regularly. He found a way to monetize his niche without needing Hollywood. Sometimes the industry fails you, but your fans won't if you meet them where they are. There's this story about a woman who was a recurring character on a primetime drama. Beautiful, talented, everything going for her. But the show got cancelled after a few seasons, and she found herself in the same boat as everyone else. Auditioning constantly, booking nothing significant. The financial pressure mounted. She had student loans from theatre school, credit card debt from trying to maintain the appearance of success. She became a server at a restaurant. Not even a fancy restaurant where she might make good tips. A chain restaurant where the demands were high and the pay was low. She said the humiliation of serving tables while her former castmates continued working was almost unbearable. She'd see their faces on billboards while she was asking customers if they wanted to try the appetizer special. But the job taught her grit. She learned to smile through rudeness, to keep going when exhausted, to find dignity in honest work. A regular customer who came in weekly turned out to be a casting director. Not every fairy tale is a lie. That casting director brought her in for a role, she booked it, and slowly rebuilt her career. She's doing TV movies and streaming content now. Not a list, but working. And she says she'll never forget where she came from or treat service workers poorly because she knows how hard that work is. Let me tell you about a guy who was in a boy band that transitioned to acting. The boy band had been huge, sold out arenas, the whole thing. He was trying to establish himself as a serious actor, got a few roles, but was always fighting the boy band stigma. Eventually, the roles dried up, his boy band money was gone, spent on bad investments and expensive lifestyle. He had to start over completely. He became a personal trainer. It wasn't totally random. He'd always been into fitness, it was part of the boy band image. But going from performing for thousands to counting someone's bicep curls, the ego hit was massive. He struggled with depression and identity crisis. Who was he if he wasn't a performer? But slowly, through helping others achieve their fitness goals, he found a new sense of purpose. His clients didn't care about his past. They cared about whether he could help them. He started posting workout videos online, built a following based on his personality and knowledge, not his past fame. That grew into a fitness brand, supplements, programs. He monetized his knowledge and work ethic in a new way. He occasionally does nostalgia tours with his old bandmates, but his primary income is his fitness business. He learned that reinvention is possible if you're willing to let go of who you used to be. There was this actress who did a lot of TV work in the 90s and early 2000s. Guest spots, recurring roles, solid career but never quite broke through to star status. By the late 2000s, those opportunities were disappearing. Younger actresses were getting the roles she used to book. The industry had moved on. She needed stable income and health insurance, luxuries that freelance acting doesn't provide. She got a job in administration at a hospital. Filing paperwork, scheduling appointments, answering phones. The monotony was mind-numbing after the variety and creativity of acting. But the stability was something she hadn't had in 20 years. Regular paychecks, benefits, retirement contributions. She said it took about a year to stop feeling like a failure. The turning point was when a co-worker's child recognized her from an old show. The joy on that kid's face, the excitement, reminded her that her work had touched people. It had value even if it was in the past. She still works at the hospital and has made peace with her career. She does community theatre for the love of it, no pressure, no stakes. Sometimes the ending isn't a triumphant return but a quiet acceptance. Here's a story about a guy who was known for comedy. He did stand up, got a development deal, had a sitcom that ran for one season before getting cancelled. In Hollywood terms, that's considered a failure even though most people would kill for that opportunity. After the cancellation, he couldn't get arrested. Nobody wanted him. His stand-up career had stalled because he'd focused on the TV opportunity. He was broke and depressed. He ended up driving a delivery truck for a package company. The physical labor and early morning hours were brutal. But it got him out of his head. He couldn't wallow in self-pity when he had 200 packages to deliver by 6 p.m. The customers on his route got to know him, appreciated his friendly demeanor. Some recognized him from his sitcom. Their reactions varied, but mostly people were just kind. He started incorporating his delivery job experiences into his stand-up, developed a whole new hour about it. That material resonated because it was real and relatable. He recorded a special, put it out independently, and it found an audience. He's back doing stand-up full-time now and occasionally acting. But he kept the delivery job for a while even after he could afford to quit because it kept him grounded. Sometimes success is remembering where you came from even when you've climbed back up. There was an actress who had a very specific moment in the sun. She was in a teen movie that became a cult classic. Her character had a few iconic lines that people still quote. But one movie doesn't make a career, especially if you're not the lead. She struggled for years afterward, always being that one character in that one movie. Eventually, she stopped auditioning because the rejection was too painful. She became an office manager at a dental practice. She answered phones, managed schedules, dealt with insurance paperwork, calmed nervous patients. It was about as far from Hollywood glamour as you can get. She said the first year was filled with shame. She'd avoid talking about her past, would make up stories if asked. But eventually, she stopped caring. Yes, she was in that movie. Yes, she's now managing a dental office. Both things can be true. A patient who was a producer recognized her and asked if she'd be interested in consulting on a project about failed actors. She helped develop the project, which led to other consulting gigs. She found a niche helping make entertainment industry portrayals more authentic. She's not performing, but she's back in the industry in a different capacity and on her own terms. Let me tell you about a character actor who worked consistently for decades. Not famous, but working. The kind of actor whose face you recognize but name you don't know. Those roles paid his bills for years. But as he aged and the industry changed, even those small roles became scarce. CGI replaced practical effects and some character roles. Streaming meant fewer opportunities. He found himself unemployed for the first time in 30 years. At 60 years old, starting over is terrifying. He became a crossing guard at an elementary school, helping kids safely cross the street, waving to parents, standing outside in all weather. Some parents recognized him from various movies and shows over the years. Their kids thought it was cool that the crossing guard used to be in movies. He said those kids gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He was keeping them safe, helping their day start positively. That mattered more than any credit ever did. He still auditions occasionally, books something here and there. But the crossing guard job is his primary gig and he genuinely loves it. Sometimes your value to the world has nothing to do with your profession and everything to do with your presence. There's this story about an actress who was on a soap opera for several years. Soap work is steady and pays well, but it's looked down upon by the rest of the industry. She wanted to transition to primetime or film. Got off the soap, started auditioning. Didn't book anything. The soap opera stigma was real. Casting directors dismissed her because of where she came from. Years passed. Savings depleted. She ended up working as a receptionist at a law firm. The corporate world was jarring after the creative environment of a set. The politics, the hierarchy, the mundane tasks. But it was income and it was stable. She said the lawyers she worked with were some of the most dramatic people she'd ever met, more than any actor. The real-life stories she heard were wilder than any soap plot. She started writing them down, turned them into a screenplay. That screenplay got optioned and eventually made. She's writing full-time now, using her soap opera training to craft compelling drama. The receptionist job gave her material and perspective she never would have gotten otherwise. Here's one about a guy who did action movies in the 80s and early 90s. He had muscles, martial arts skills, the whole package. But action heroes have expiration dates, and his came and went. The roles stopped, the body couldn't do the stunts anymore, and the money was gone. He tried to stay relevant, would post workout videos online before that was really a thing, but the audience wasn't there yet. He needed money immediately. He worked construction. The physical skills translated, lifting, carrying, working long hours in tough conditions. But construction at 50 years old after decades of stunt work and movie action? His body was destroyed. He was in constant pain. But he kept showing up because he had to. Eventually, someone on the crew recognized him, told the foreman, and the foreman asked if he'd be interested in being a safety coordinator instead of manual labor. That job led to working on actual film sets as a stunt coordinator and safety supervisor. He came full circle but through a path he never expected. His construction experience actually made him better at the film job because he understood safety protocols and risk management from a different perspective. There was this actress who was stunning, got roles based primarily on her looks. But Hollywood is especially cruel to beautiful women as they age. By her late 30s, the roles she'd built her career on were going to younger actresses. She tried to pivot to character work but didn't have the credits or training to be taken seriously. Typecasting had destroyed her range in the eyes of casting directors. She ended up working at a makeup counter at a department store. The irony of someone who'd been professionally made up by the best in the business now selling makeup to regular people. But she was actually really good at it. She understood faces, colors, techniques. Her sales numbers were high. Management wanted to promote her to supervisor but she declined. She didn't want the responsibility or stress. She just wanted to clock in, do the work, clock out. Eventually, she started doing makeup for local theater productions as a volunteer. That led to teaching makeup classes. She found satisfaction in passing on her knowledge. She's out of acting entirely now by choice. She realized she'd never actually loved acting. She'd loved the validation, the attention, the status. Once that was gone, there was nothing left to miss. Sometimes what looks like failure is actually freedom. Now let me tell you something that connects all these stories. The common thread isn't failure. It's resilience. It's the refusal to let circumstances define your worth. These people could have given up. They could have become bitter. They could have let the shame of not maintaining fame destroy them. But they didn't. They showed up to regular jobs with their heads held high. They learned new skills. They found dignity in work that society might look down on. They discovered that their value as human beings had nothing to do with their IMDb page or their name recognition. Some found their way back to the industry in different capacities. Others left entirely and built new lives. Both are valid. Both are success stories. The entertainment industry sells a lie. It tells you that fame equals worth. That success is measured in box office numbers and award nominations. That if you're not on top, you're nothing. These stories prove that's garbage. The reality is that most actors, even ones who achieve significant success, will not maintain that success forever. The industry is designed that way. There are only so many roles, only so much space at the top. For every actor still working decades into their career, there are hundreds who had their moment and then faded. That's not a character flaw. That's not a lack of talent. That's just the mathematics of an overcrowded industry. What matters is what you do when the spotlight moves on. Do you collapse? Or do you adapt? These people adapted. They took jobs that had nothing to do with their training or their dreams. They humbled themselves. They learned what most people already know, which is that work is work, and honest work has dignity regardless of the paycheck or prestige. They discovered that identity isn't tied to profession. That you can be more than what you do for a living. They found communities outside the entertainment bubble that accepted them as regular people. And many of them found that life outside fame was actually better. Less pressure. Less judgment. More authenticity. The freedom to fail without it being public. The ability to have relationships not based on what you can do for someone's career. Some of these people made it back. They're working again in various capacities. But I'd argue that even the ones who didn't make it back are successes. They survived. They provided for themselves and their families. They maintained their dignity in the face of an industry that tried to strip it away. They proved that there's life after fame, that you can reinvent yourself, that rock bottom is not the end unless you decide it is. These are the stories Hollywood doesn't want you to hear because they complicate the narrative. The industry wants you to believe that fame is everything, that losing it is a fate worse than death, that the only measure of an actor's worth is their current booking status. But these stories tell a different truth. They tell us that actors are human beings who sometimes have to make hard choices. That working a normal job isn't shameful. That struggling financially doesn't mean you failed as a person. That adaptation is a strength, not a weakness. Every single person I've told you about today displayed more courage working at that grocery store or driving that truck or serving those tables than they ever did on a movie set. Because on a movie set, they had support, direction, makeup, lighting, takes, and editing. In the real world, dealing with financial pressure, public recognition, potential mockery, and the death of their dreams, they had to show up as themselves with no script and no second take. That's real bravery. That's real strength. And if you take nothing else from this video, take this. Your worth is not your job title. Your value is not your salary. Your identity is not your career. These are things you do, not things you are. The people in these stories learned that lesson the hard way. They lost the thing they thought defined them and discovered they were still whole people underneath. They were still worthy of respect, love, and happiness. The job was just a job, even when that job was being a movie star. So the next time you see a celebrity fall from grace, or hear about an actor working a normal job, don't pity them. Don't mock them. Respect them. Because they're doing what most people do every single day. They're surviving. They're adapting. They're refusing to let circumstances destroy them. They're showing up and doing the work, whatever that work might be. In a culture obsessed with fame and success, these people chose dignity and perseverance. They chose to keep going even when it would have been easier to give up. They chose to find value in themselves rather than in external validation. And honestly, that makes them more impressive than any movie role ever could. That makes them heroes in a way that Hollywood could never write. Because this isn't fiction. This is real life. And in real life, the heroes are the ones who keep getting up after being knocked down. The ones who adapt when circumstances change. The ones who find meaning beyond the spotlight. These actors, these former celebrities, these regular people working regular jobs, they're all around us. At the grocery store, driving us places, serving our food, teaching our kids. And they deserve our respect not for what they used to be, but for who they chose to become when everything changed.